Hello, everybody. This is the All Metal Mode podcast, and this is Mike Hare and Mr. Dorian Cook. Dorian will be joining us a little bit later. He's running a little bit behind. He had a really busy day, so he was going to take care of a few things, and then he'll jump on. So just bear with us, and we'll get into it. And excuse me. And Dorian will talk all about Jesse James. We did do a show in the past where he talked a little bit about Jesse James. He's gonna go into a lot more detail tonight. It's probably going to be a 2 or 3 part, and very very interesting stuff. I've talked to him before about it off air. We've had some conversations and some pretty mind blowing stuff. So. Just hang out with me for a little bit and we'll wait for him. So before we get into it, a couple things, or guess not for while we're waiting on him, a couple things I wanted to bring up. First off, PredatorTools.com, builder of the highest quality digging tools. They're made from the finest American-made steel, built right here in the United States. George heat treats and tempers each one at a time. Ooh, I'm struggling. I'll tell you what, just 7 o'clock rolled around real quick, and before I knew it, I was on air. Just second to none. They build the most incredible tools. They have a 5-year warranty, but I'm telling you, unless you abuse it, and I don't even know how you could abuse it, it'll last you a lifetime. You know, it's something you can hand down to one of your kids and last them a lifetime. I'm 300 pounds and I've used them to pry up rocks and everything else. I don't know how much more demanding you could be of a tool than I am, and I've never broke one. If you're interested in one, you can go to PredatorTools.com. Or you can call Pam at 856-455-3790 and tell them that I sent you. They're absolutely fantastic people. We've had them on the podcast, I think, 3 times now. I believe Gypsy and Amanda will be having them on Monday night soon, probably to do a giveaway too. So stay tuned for that, and we'll announce that. Dirt Digest. There's if you're not familiar with it, Dirt Digest Magazine.com, I believe it is. I better double check that. I'm pretty sure it's Dirt Digest Magazine. But let me double check. Yeah, DirtDigestMagazine.com. Of course, April's issue is out. I'm working on the May issue. Still waiting on some couple articles, but we have some really good articles going right now already in it that I've already put in it. If you go out to Facebook and Dirt Digest Magazine group, there's a competition for the best find that you can submit, and we'll put in the magazine. And there's a small competition for that, and there's a competition, I believe, for a hand digger, for the best article. So if you got an article in mind or something, get it sent. We'll get it published, and whoever wins will get the hand digger. Good time to write while everybody's most people are home and nobody's working. Allmetalmode.com. Joanna, I don't even try to say Joanna's last name. She takes care of our website. She does all the website stuff, and she's amazing at it. And she does a little writing, and she just wrote an article about a ring that's getting returned. I don't think it's quite been returned yet. It's in the process. And now I forget what country it's from. But a guy here in the United States, his ring ended up something like 4,000 miles away in another country, and he'd never visited there. And a couple guys found it, and it's a really neat story. And then of course, there's a ton of other stories out there that I've written. She's written a couple. One of my last ones talked about good detectors for coins. Talked a little bit about using my Tesoros while I was in Ohio relic hunting. That one's out there. There's an article on how to listen to the podcast, how to come into the chat, and all that. Joanna wrote a really nice article on how people perceive us metal detecting and some of the good that us detectorists do. That's out there. How to clean silver coins without devaluing them. I mean, we've got a lot of good articles. I don't know how many we have, but I've been at it for a couple years now, and there's just a ton of articles. Field hunting, was it ever there? Do you need headphones for metal detecting? Just a ton of stuff going on out there. When you get time, take a look, allmetalmode.com. You can also listen to the podcast through there. If you are listening, make sure you jump in and join us in chat. And that's real easy to do. Look for the chat bubble when you click on the show and it starts playing at the bottom. There's a little rectangular box that pops up with controls at it, and you'll see the chat bubble there. Jump in chat and join us. What else is there? I don't know. Been hunting with, last week, Dennis Wynn filled in and for Dorian that was out sick. And Dennis, I'll tell you what, really neat guy, and I'm so happy I've met him. He's about 45 minutes from me, nice drive. And that guy knows Texas. He knows how to research it, how to look for everything. And man, has he put us onto a good spot. And he's doing some more research right now. Before the show, he was sending me pictures and stuff, and just so cool, some of the stuff he's researching and finding. Bill in chat says I need to say relic machine more. Haven't heard it in a while. There for a while they were playing a drinking game. Evidently from me saying relic machine. I don't know why it's called relic machine instead of relic metal detector. Don't judge me. Feel like you're judging me, Bill. So okay, we're ready to go. Let me get Dorian in. He just messaged me that he is ready to go. So hang on one second, folks. Let me give him a call. Hopefully we got everything set up. I hope you guys can't hear that. Hey, Dorian.
Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
I sure can. You're coming in loud and clear.
All right.
Good deal. I didn't have much more to say. I was running out of things to say. Perfect timing.
Well, don't worry. I don't think I'm going to run out of things to say tonight.
Good. Because I was getting there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I assume we are live and on the air?
Yes, sir.
Well, greetings to everybody. Sorry to have to be absent there. I just really got tore up by these tree pollen allergies that started to hit me 2 or 3 years ago, and my eyes were all swollen, and my vision was blurry. I couldn't even see notes, so I thought I'd better sit that one out, and I'm doing much, much better. I'm about 95 to 98% recovered, normal vision. And actually, the amazing thing is my vision is better than it was before I got this allergy attack. So maybe I got a benefit out of all of it.
Good.
Well, Mike, I'm really excited about tonight. We've, I've hit the highlights about Jesse James on some of the KGC shows and things we've done, but there is so much more to the story. And I'd just like to ask those of you who have heard what I've given so far on that subject, there will be some things that you have heard before because I have to work them in chronologically. And we have a lot of people that were, not in the group or listening to the podcast, and maybe they've not heard those yet. So I don't want to leave them, kind of lost by coming into the middle of the movie, so to speak. So we're going to start with some basic things, and then we're going to proceed from there because Jesse James is, without a doubt, one of the single most famous figures in all of American history, albeit he is famous for being supposedly one of the most visible and active outlaws in the Western period, you might say, after the Civil War. But he's drawn a lot of attention from various authors and historians, and there's been many, many books written. And the problem we have is like a huge fog surrounds the real Jesse James, and trying to penetrate it and to see this man as who he was and what his actual part and place in our history is. It's an excellent and very exciting thing to look at. For those of us who are history detectives, it has been a super challenge to sort through all of the claims and stories. I have a file, Mike, on Jesse James that's 4 inches thick. And that's not books, that's papers. I have letters from his relatives, and I have letters from his grandson who became a personal friend, and I'll be talking more about Jesse Lee James III. And I had an opportunity to go to California, rather. I was invited to view all of the James family records. So I've had a rare opportunity in that regard, and that's helped me a lot, along with Jesse Lee's tutelage, to understand his famous grandfather and just exactly who he is and what he was and when he lived and how long he lived. Because one of the things, if we're going to understand this man, we're going to have to understand that he faked his own death. And I'm going to give you the proof of that tonight. In fact, I'll be giving some of that to you very quickly here. He did fake his own death to get the Pinkerton men, who were the forerunners of the Secret Service. There was no Secret Service in existence during the Civil War. Alan Pinkerton and his private detective agency were the closest thing that the federal government had. And they were the ones who tracked Jesse, tried to bring him to justice, as they would say, and were not successful. They just weren't successful at all. And there were reasons for that. Some authors are saying that now there were 3, some say 2. And I want to talk about that tonight because it is possible that there may have been 4 men in the James family.
Hey, Dorian, you just got kind of echoey.
I'm sorry. How's that?
Same.
The same. Okay. Something happened, Mike, to my microphone. It turned itself off for some reason. I do not know.
I think we're going to be okay, though.
Let's see. How about now?
It's the same, but that's okay. You're sounding okay.
Well, I'm afraid you'll start getting that awful feedback we had problems with if I don't find the microphone turning back on. Let me see just a second. Okay, I'm going to unplug the microphone, and I'm going to try to put it back in. How about now, Mike?
Yeah, I think pretty good.
Yeah, you're back in my headphones.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're going to try to sort through all of these Jesse James and see that they had a part in the overall creation of the legend of Jesse James. They had a part to play, as it turns out. But the truth of his story is so much more fascinating to me than any of the fiction that I've seen. Been a lot of movies made. Audie Murphy, I remember, played Jesse James in a movie, and so on. But the first thing we want to do is we want to establish the real Jesse James. We want to establish who he was and how long he lived and where he died. Because I'm going to be telling you that the real Jesse James lived to be 104 years old and died in Granbury, Texas in 1951. Now, there are many authors that would get mad and storm and stomp and say, no, that's not true. I've got this, that, other information, blah, blah, blah. But there's one existing piece of evidence on the man who died under the alias of Jesse Frank Dalton. There's one piece of evidence that just stops everybody on their negative claims against this man being the real Jesse James. And it's the autopsy on his body when he died. The coroner's examination of the body. I have it right here in front of me, and I want to read it to you. And we're going to start with his death so that we can, you see, I've got to establish in your mind that this man lived way beyond 1882 when he was supposed to have died, and that he was involved in a lot of secret activities all the way up until the last 2 or 3 years before his death. So, if we write him off as dead at 1882, then everything I tell you about his activities after that would mean nothing to you. It would have no meaning, but it all ties together. So let's start, and let's see what the coroner had to say about the body of this man known as Jesse Frank Dalton. Now, I was told by Jesse Lee James, who became my very good friend back in the 70s, and Jesse Lee was, I believe, murdered in about 1987 to keep him quiet. But Jesse told me, let's see, what was I going to say? I lost my train here. I apologize. It's been a long day, folks. I hope you all are doing a little better at your grocery store than we are. We had to drive 100 miles to find grocery stores where we could get everything we needed. We've got some real problems here locally. And I just barely got in here and was running a little late, so I apologize for that, and I'll try to get organized and make this old tired brain work tonight here. Jesse, when he decided to kill himself off, he knew he would have to operate under a different name, and we know that he had at least 72 different aliases in his lifetime. He used, for example, he was a personal friend of Henry Ford, who made, started the Ford Automobile Company. And he actually would impersonate Henry Ford at times on certain missions that he did. That's just one small example. But he took his brother, Sylvester Franklin James, he took his famous brother's name for a middle name. So you had Jesse Franklin, and then the Dalton. Of course, we know that the Jameses had associations with the Daltons, but most people don't know that the tie-in came in that Jesse's mother was Molly Dalton from Georgia. I've been looking for pictures of her. I've got quite a few pictures I wanted to post in all metal mode so you could follow along on the pictures, and I just didn't get it done today. But this is not going to be the only part of our story tonight. There's going to be more, and I will get those pictures up. And we'll show you some very interesting things, like the body of Jesse James. You can actually see the bullet wound over the man's eye that Jesse gave that man, who ended up being buried as Jesse James. And we're going to talk about that man and his brothers. We're going to go into detail about how Jesse faked his death. But anyway, he took his mother's maiden name and his brother's middle name for a middle name, and he was Jesse Frank Dalton. In 1948, he came out and proclaimed that he was the real Jesse James. And there were many people that had associated with him, both in the Golden Circle and the Confederate Army, rode with Quantrill, that came and signed affidavits saying, yes, this is the real Jesse James. Now, let me tell you, Jesse James was not above telling a major lie if it served his purposes. He believed in expediency, and that if telling a lie would further his goals, he would do it. So he's told some whoppers in his time, and that's why we have to just like sifting dirt to try to find ancient artifacts. Catch them in the screen. We have to sift all of this information and sift out the false and try to hang on to the good stuff. But when he died, he was given this examination, and I have an actual copy of that report filed in the county seat there in Granbury, Texas. And it's fading with age, getting hard to read, but I have some other copies of it from newspaper articles who reprinted it. And I want you to listen to this and ask yourself, have you ever heard of, even on television, of an autopsy report even remotely like the one I'm about to read to you? Here we go. Post-mortem examination held upon the body of Jesse Woodson James, alias Jesse Frank Dalton, and other identities during his lifetime. Said examination being held at the Estes Funeral Home, Granbury, Texas, on August the 17th, 1951. The examination showed 1. Height, 5 foot 8.5, as nearly as could be determined, lying flat on his back. Jesse's, was a little bit stooped with old age, and we believe that his actual height was 5'9.5" in his younger years. Okay, number 2, eyes were blue, long hair was white, and fair skin. And here we go. Number 3, bullet wound through the left shoulder. Number 4, bullet wound on the lower left side of the belly. Number 5, evidence of rope burns on his neck. Wore shirt size 17.5. Number 6, bullet wound on the right side of his neck. Let's see. Number 7, bullet wound between shoulders at base of neck. Number 8, bullet wound along the hairline above both eyes. Number 9, bullet wound under the right eye, causing the eye to droop due to removal of a mole. Number 10, small scar along under his right eyelid may have been due to removal of the mole. Number 11, scar of some undetermined kind on his lower lip. Number 12, powder burns across the chin hidden by a Buffalo Bill type of goatee. Number 13, 2 bullet wounds on the right shoulder. Number 14, 3 or 4 bullet wounds along the left arm from the wrist to the elbow. Number 15, 3 or 4 bullet wounds indicated above the elbow on the left arm. Number 16, tip end sort of chewed off on the end of the left index finger. And I will tell you that this was one of the identifying marks that the Pinkertons had in their files of the real Jesse James, because he'd gotten into a knife fight with the Mexican, and the Mexican chewed off the end of his index finger, and Jesse took exception to that, and he was the one who walked away from the knife fight, minus the tip of his finger. Number 17, 2 bullet wounds in the right chest near the nipple. Number 18, bullet wound along the right side near the second lower rib. Number 19, evidence of several bullet wounds up and down the right arm, probably 9 or 10 wounds. Number 20, both feet show evidence of having been severely burned, scars on both knees. And that's exactly right, because the Pinkertons also had that in their files, because during the Civil War, Jesse and Quantrill's men robbed a Union payroll in a strongbox off of a riverboat, and they dumped it in a nearby swamp. So because the box was too heavy to carry, they planned to come back and get it. Jesse got captured, and the Union soldiers that captured him lit a fire and actually put his feet in the fire to try to torture him into telling where the strongbox was. He didn't tell, but those scars were with him all of his life, and these were on the feet of Jesse Frank Dalton. Now let's see. Okay, number 21. We got two more. Bad wound on the back between both of his hips. And number 22, a cataracts on both eyes. Mike, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of anyone that survived that many bullet wounds?
No, no, I have not.
All right, let me ask you another question. If this man is not Jesse James, why isn't he known in history? How could he have gotten that many bullet wounds without making some news, without somebody
Right.
knowing who he was? You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And when you
Absolutely.
when you try to track Jesse Frank Dalton, he just disappears.
Hmm.
There you can't. He has no history.
Wow. That's crazy.
So my point is, this one document is such absolutely strong evidence, since just this man, Jesse Frank Dalton, had all the identifying signs in the Pinkerton's files on his body. So, with that established, I want to go ahead then and tell the story of Jesse Frank Dalton. And we want to start with how he. We're not going to do chronological. At times, I will be a little chronological, but tonight I want to focus on exactly how he faked his death. It is a fascinating story. I have not gone into it in detail before, and there's pieces of it that you will find just absolutely amazing. Let me get my place in my notes. I have underlined with a yellow marker, and I got to find him here. Now, while I'm looking through this here, let me to find my place. Let me point out something. One of the things that's made it difficult to sort fact from fiction, and I'm not going to be ridiculous and say, oh, yeah, my account is 100% accurate. It's not. I'm sorry. I wish it was. I've done my best to make it accurate, but my accuracy and what I'm telling you is probably somewhere between 85 and 90%. There is going to be a little error here and there. I have gotten letters from James family members on things that I've published in the past correcting me on minor points. They've all told me, says, you basically got it down pretty good. But, on this particular point here, this is actually what happened or whatever. So there'll be a little bit of that, but hopefully it's going to be peripheral details and nothing that's going to, interfere with our pursuit of this man, this incredible individual. And by the way, something that runs in the James family is a photographic memory. Jesse had it according to his grandson, and I know his grandson had it because I experienced that firsthand. This man could draw detailed maps. He drew me a map of a KGC site in the middle of millions of acres of Arkansas Timber Company land, and he described it in detail. And he had not been there. Basically, he was making this drawing based on a drawing his grandfather made him and showed him something like 35 or 40 years before his death. And he remembered every detail, and he drew me a map of this place, this geological feature. And when I finally found it, every single thing on that drawing of Jesse Lee's was 100% accurate, including where the cave was, where the KGC was supposed to have buried $10 million in gold bullion. The problem was the cave had been blown up by somebody who triggered a booby trap, and they were still in there, and then they brought down the whole ceiling of the cave. It would have taken a major excavation to get it out, and when I thought all that land was paper company land owned by the big companies like Weyerhaeuser. And when I did my due diligence and checked the ownership of this geological feature, which was a kind of a cliff type thing along a creek, turned out it was owned by Lyndon Johnson's wife, Lady Bird Johnson. What were the chances of that? But old Jesse was very, very accurate, and I even took old guys with me when we went out to California. Took a really old guy, and this guy tried for 3 hours to trip him up. He would talk about people and relationships, and he would deliberately change names or relationships. And every time he did, Jesse Lee would correct him and say, "No, that's not right. So and so was related to such and such, and they were brother-in-laws or whatever." He had it all down. Man had an amazing, amazing memory. So let's get into how Jesse faked his death. Jesse was getting constant harassment by the Pinkertons after the Civil War. He and his, Jesse himself being the treasurer of the Knights of the Golden Circle in the 12-man inner circle, he was responsible for the finances of the Golden Circle, for building the cache sites where they hid the loot that they stole from the northern bankers. And of course, they were waging a resistance campaign, a resistance war against the North, against especially Jay Gould, the famous cajillionaire back then. You know, he was like the Nelson Rockefeller or the David Rockefeller of his day. Jay Gould caused a worldwide depression when he cornered the market on gold, as I recall. And he and Jesse James were bitter enemies. So Jesse frequently hit the trains that Gould owned, his railroads, the banks that he owned, major interest in, things like that. And Gould wanted him killed badly, and did everything in his power that his money could buy to try to do it. And Jesse outsmarted him. But the Pinkertons were constantly forcing Jesse to keep moving, and he had a problem developing from another direction, and he finally decided that he could solve both the problem of the Pinkertons pursuing him as well as this other problem I'm going to tell you about. There was three brothers who lived in St. Joseph, Missouri, and they were basically shacked up with a prostitute. And they were committing bank robberies all over Missouri, Kansas, places like that. And when they would, as they left the bank with the money, the leader of the three brothers would yell out, tell the sheriff that Jesse James robbed your bank." So this man was Charlie Bigelow, and he had his brothers Bert and John Bigelow. The Bigelows were a large family. They, I think, have quite a contingent out in California to this day. But these were their three black sheep of the Bigelow family, and they not only were robbing and killing, but they were committing rape. And Jesse, being from Southern chivalry, gentleman type thing, he didn't want his name associated with rape. So he decided that Charlie and Bert and John Bigelow were going to have to go. And so he got some of his men to set up a surveillance on the house that they were living in St. Joe. And these men watched them come and go, and they discovered that every morning about 8 o'clock, the three brothers came out of the house, and they went to the barn because the outhouse was inside the barn. So once they saw that this was an established pattern, the information was passed on to Jesse. And so Jesse decided that he would have to take care of business with these three guys. Now, this is where a very important individual comes into the story. He was a black man, very tall. They called him a giant of a man. He started life out as a slave on a Louisiana plantation, and his name was Sam Skates. That was the name given him by his master. Sam, because of his size, was used in sporting contests between the southern cotton planters. They would set up a ring in a barn, one of them's barn, and they would fight their slaves bare knuckle fights, and they would bet great sums of money on who would win the fights. Well, Sam Skates fought 21 fights, and in every fight he killed his opponent by hitting him with his fists. So he had quite a reputation. Jesse happened to be at the 21st fight that Sam Skates fought in, and he was so impressed with this young man that he bought him from his owner, and he set him free on the spot. Well, Sam Skates was so grateful that he would never leave Jesse after that. He became his personal bodyguard. He took the alias of John Trammell. And all the records and pictures that I've got indicate he lived to be 117 years old. So he was one who came to Jesse's bedside, Jesse Frank Dalton's bedside, just a few days before he died, and declared that he was the real Jesse James. Anyway, they worked out a plan whereby the other guys that Jesse had with him, they were part of the Golden Circle, and there were black men, ex-Confederate soldiers especially, that there were 65,000 black men that served with the South. That is a documentable record. It is a fact. Now, they were held in great contempt after the Civil War, of course, by their own people. And Jesse wanted them taken care of because of their loyalty. And he appointed Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was one of the members of the great Confederate cavalry leader, who was one of the 12 Inner Circle members, to form what was called the Ku Klux Klan, not Ku Klux Klan, but Ku Klux, which is the Greek word for circle. In other words, the Circle Klan. And this was a organization designed to benefit Confederate soldiers, black and white. And it helped these soldiers survive when they couldn't get work. It was kind of like Confederate soldiers' unemployment, if you please. Eventually, the organization was infiltrated by Northern agents. They began to preach hate against blacks, against Jews, against other people. And when Nathan Bedford Forrest saw this was happening, he issued a formal order, this is a fact, for the Ku Klux Klan, the Circle Klan lodges to disband. And all those that were still loyal to him disbanded, and those that remained formed the modern organization we know as the Ku Klux Klan. Now, keep in mind that there was a thing where being a Masonic occult organization and guarding their secrets very, very carefully, they tried to conceal a lot of the truth from the public, and the federal government definitely still tries to conceal the truth about the Knights of the Golden Circle because they don't want it known that there was a resistance war going on in this country all the way up to about 1916 after the Civil War. They don't want it known that they did not bring that under control and eliminate the people fighting in that resistance war. They never did. So that's still kind of classified, and so you have both sides with secrets about this information, see, and so it takes some digging. I've been working on it 30 years now, and I keep digging out more and more pieces of hidden information. But anyway, let's get back to the Bigelows. Jesse had his men placed in a circle around the house, hidden in, in concealed places, bushes and woods and things like that, so that the Bigelow brothers could not possibly escape. And on that, I believe it was an April morning, was it? April the 7th. I'm working off the top of my head here. Don't have it right in front of me. When they decided to do this, they expected the Bigelows to come out at 8 o'clock and do their routine going to the barn, and they were going to take them in the barn, and they didn't come out of the house at 8 o'clock. So they waited and they waited, and finally, as they were about to just call it an aborted mission for that day, they came out and they went into the barn. Now, John Trammell carried an over and under rifle. It had both I think a 45-70 cartridge rifle, and it had a shotgun. And I'm not expert enough to remember the gauge. 10 gauge was common during the Civil War, but I'm not sure if an over and under was 10 gauge or not. If any of you out there are gun aficionados and you want to chime in there on chat or something, please feel free to do so. But anyway, John Trammell went around to the back of the barn, and he came in through the back door quietly. And the reason he was able to get in and not be spotted was Jesse James went to the big barn door, which had a small man-sized door in it, and he shouted out, something to the effect, "Charlie Bigelow, I'm coming for you." And they exchanged some words. And Jesse was wearing a Civil War version of an iron plate, two-piece iron plate bullet protection vest. He was wearing that under his coat. And when he opened the door, he was silhouetted against the light. And Bigelow fired first, and the bullet ricocheted off the very top edge of this iron vest on the right side and went through his right shoulder. Jesse was, according to the men that rode with him, even when he was 17, he was a phenomenal pistol shot. And he seldom ever missed. And it was his trademark when performing an execution, is the way he looked at this, to shoot the man over the right eye. And if you look at the picture, you can go online and Google Jesse James body, and you'll get the picture of supposedly Jesse laying in his coffin. There'll probably be some close-ups. If you'll take the close-up and copy it and blow it up in your own phone or whatever, you will see where the bullet struck Charlie Bigelow in the eyebrow at the corner, the outside corner of his eyebrow. The only thing is, it's on the left side in the picture, but you have to understand the way the photography worked on those glass plates. You're seeing a reverse image. You're actually looking at the right eye and not the left, but you can actually see the bullet wound, the blood spot there where the bullet went in, right at the corner of the eyebrow. Now, at the same time, the commotion at the front of the barn caused Bert and John Bigelow to turn towards the front and draw their guns with the intention of helping their brother. This allowed John Trammell to come up behind them and kill both of them. So there they had the three dead Bigelow brothers. And Jesse went into the house to make sure there wasn't anybody else in there except the prostitute. And he told her, he says, "You're going to pose as my wife. When the sheriff comes, you're going to identify Charlie Bigelow as Jesse James. Jesse had his men take Charlie's body and stand it up against the wall in front of this famous picture that Jesse was supposed to be dusting when he got shot in the back by Bob Ford. He stood him up against a wall and he fired a bullet into Bigelow's body and fired it into his back. Then he turned to Bob Ford. Now, Bob and his brother, and I forget his brother's name off the top of my head. I've got it here in my notes somewhere. Might not be able to find it quick enough here. Anyway, he turned to Bob Ford was a jockey. You know, jockeys were small men because of the weight factor in horse races. But he and his brother both actually rode horses, and he turned to Bob Ford. He said, "Bob, go tell the sheriff that you killed Jesse James." So, this is how the great hoax started, but there was still a lot of work to do. Governor Crittenden of Missouri was also, unbeknownst to, of course, to the public, was a member of the inner circle of the Knights of the Golden Circle and a close personal friend of Jesse James. Well, the sheriff and local people, nobody knew what Jesse James looked like. So the sheriff telegraphed Governor Crittenden at St. Louis and said, "We need somebody who can identify Jesse James' body." And Crittenden says, "Well, I have a man on my staff, Harrison Troe, Treaux, who rode with Jesse and Quantrill. I'll send him down, on such and such train." Well, this actually had been prearranged by Jesse and the governor and Harrison Troe. So Harrison Troe got on the train. Everybody saw him leave St. Louis, so they could all testify that he was on his way down to identify Jesse James' body. At the town, forget the name of it, the last stop before St. Joe, Troe gets off the train and Jesse James gets on the train. Let's see here. Hang on. So when the train arrives in town, the sheriff and the townspeople are waiting. Jesse James gets off the train and identifies himself to the sheriff as Harrison Troe. So Jesse James actually was the one who identified Charlie Bigelow's body to the authorities as the dead Jesse James. And I'm going to skip through some of the smaller details. Jesse let's see. Yeah, okay. Jesse ended up sitting in church listening to the preacher preach his funeral. He told his grandson later, he said, the man, something to the effect that it was quite eloquent, and he says, "And my eyes teared up." And Jesse served as a pallbearer at his own funeral. Now, how's that one for a huge, huge joke on the opposition? So Jesse gets a hold of the woman that all of the authors and historians say was his mother, Zerelda Samuels. And that was not Jesse's mother, that was his aunt. Zerelda Samuels had two sons by a previous marriage to one of the Jameses. And their names were Jesse Robert James, his nickname was Dingus, and the other one was Alexander Franklin James. So Kentucky Jesse and Frank James were cousins to Missouri Frank and Jesse James. And there was some family resemblance, but there were differences enough that anyone, paying attention and seeing them side by side could tell the difference right away as to which one was which. So what happened was, as time went by, and I've mentioned this before, but we want to be reminded that history took these two sets of brothers and amalgamated them into one set of brothers. And that really confuses the historical record of who did what, where, why, and when. Thankfully, with the help of the James family records and Jesse's total recall of the conversations that he had with his grandfather about various things, we've been able to sort out enough to know. We know that both Robert Dingus James and Alexander Franklin James, they also rode with Quantrill, as did Kentucky Frank and Jesse. And again, Frank's James' first name was Sylvester. He was Sylvester Franklin James. And their father was George James, Captain George James of the Confederate Army. Now, we have these three bodies. Jesse sends a man to get Zarella Samuels and get her back there. And he tells her, you're going to identify Charlie Bigelow as me. And she's been a little bit contrary. And so they paid her $1,000. And then she got cooperative. And then she decided she needs another $500. And it turned out later on that she actually tried to blackmail Jesse James. And he finally ordered her executed, and it was done. You can find pictures of Zarella Samuels if you Google her name on the net. Anyway, he told his men to dig a hole 15 feet deep in her front yard. And he said, we're going to bury the two brothers, John and Bert, on the bottom, and we're going to put Charlie on top. And he told her that we're doing that in your front yard to remind you to keep your mouth shut about what really happened here. So like I said, eventually that led to her trying to blackmail Jesse, and that was a very dumb thing to do. And he had his own aunt executed. Now, this is where it gets very interesting to me. John Trammell, Jesse had taught him to sign his own name, but he couldn't read and write. So one of Jesse's men who was with Trammell was Bud Dalton. And John says, he wanted to make a record so that someday when it was dug up, it would tell the truth about who was buried in that grave. So he made some bricks, and he had Bud Dalton write the story, including the brick that had the names Charlie Bigelow, John Bigelow, and Bert Bigelow on it. And there were 6 of these bricks. And once the writing had been put in them while they were wet, they were still soft, then John Trammell baked them in a campfire. Not being an expert on brick making, they would not have been super quality bricks, but they hardened enough that they put them in the hole and covered them up. And there was a big to-do on an exhumation, and they actually found 3 of the 6 bricks. And I have it's not a real good picture, but it's clear enough that you can actually see the names of Bert, Charlie, and John Bigelow engraved in the face of the brick. That appeared actually, that photo is from the front page of the St. Joseph newspaper. And somewhere in my notes here, I've got the exact date. trying to see if I can find it here. Anyway, this did result in the Pinkertons for a while. It got the Pinkertons off of him. They believed the ruse, but they begin to suspect, as the robberies continue to the trains and things, they begin to suspect that it was a hoax as time went on.
Dorian, can you give us some examples of some of the train robberies they suspected that he was still alive? Do you have that information in front of you?
I do not. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was just curious. That would
I
be
can
pretty neat.
provide it. I can provide it, but I'm going to have to go back and, like I said, Mike, I've got 4 inches of material, and that's a lot of pages to go
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
I'm seeing that even just trying to find what I want in the pages I'm looking at now. Let's see, it's difficult enough. I'm trying to find the date of when these bricks were dug up. Somebody might want to research that and see the picture that was on the front page. Nope, not coming across it. By the way, Jesse was one of the original backers, the financiers of Wild Bill Cody's, Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. I thought that was really interesting. He was also one of the financiers of the Ford Motor Company. He gave Henry Ford a big chunk of the money he used to start that company. And let's see here. Okay. So Jesse had a sister, Matilda, and they were born on a plantation near Frankfort, Kentucky. It was a 2-story stone house. It wasn't, a super wealthy person's plantation with the giant columns on the front like you see in the Civil War movies. It was a solid 2-story cut stone house. And a cut stone house was a very expensive type of house to build. It had a simple front porch on it. So obviously Captain George James was well-to-do, but he certainly wasn't extravagantly rich by any means. We know, and I've mentioned this before, but I think it needs to be mentioned here. We know that when the order was given to the Confederate artillery to fire on Fort Sumter, which is considered to be the official start of the Civil War, we know that the officer who gave the order to fire the cannon, first shot, was a Captain George James. And the clues are pointing towards Jesse's father. We think that was Jesse's father that gave the command to start the Civil War. But, I'm not going to tell you it's the gospel truth because I don't know for sure yet. But I'm suspecting that's eventually we're going to find the corroborating evidence we need. I doubt seriously the chance of the coincidence of it, of it being another Captain George James, it's just too great, really, to put much into. I want to talk a little bit about Jesse and his relationship with black people. Uh, he, in many ways, appeared like a white Robin Hood to the Mississippi River Basin blacks. He always had a few dollars for an old Negro couple that was down on his luck, or a job for a young black with a family to raise. And there is no written or spoken record of Jesse Woodson James ever mistreating a black man. The blacks loved him, along with the Indians and the Mexican Americans who worked on his ranches and in his mines. Let's see. I think I'm getting close to that. I'm trying to find out part of the story on those bricks that John Trammell buried. And there were, in Jesse's immediate circle of men who assisted him on missions, there were other black men. There was a man named Lucky Johnson, and I've got pictures of him that I'm going to post eventually here. And Charlie Smith, another one. And Charlie Smith is said to have lived to be 129 years old before he died. And by the way, I have a picture that I will post. Yeah, Charlie Smith, Social Security said he was 132, on July the 4th, 1974. So that would make him the longest living veteran of the Civil War, because supposedly the last one died out in 53. But that would be another 21 years. But here's a classic photograph. I've got a photocopy of it, which is not real good. I've got to get the original photograph and make a better photo. But you got to see this. This is Jesse James, probably a few months before he died. He's laying in bed, and he's being visited. He's holding the hand of a man who is Cole Younger, the outlaw Cole Younger. And standing above him in a buckskin fringed jacket is another older man who used the alias of Brushy Bill Roberts and is none other than the real Billy the Kid. So we have Cole Younger, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James in this picture. So I'm looking forward to, like I said, posting that. I've got to get. I've got a photocopy of this picture, but it's not really good enough. If I take a picture of it, it's not going to be that good. So I've got to get a copy of the book and take a picture of that picture, and then I can get a decent image, I think. Now, I wanted to give you an idea. Let's talk treasure now. We'll talk about Jesse James and treasure. But I want to give you an idea of some of the operations that he got involved in after his, alleged death. And probably some of you at least have heard of the Emperor Maximilian, the French emperor who ruled Mexico for a while till he was overthrown and supposedly executed by a firing squad by the Mexicans. Well, there's quite a story behind this man, and he actually came to be a member of the Golden Circle. And let's see where we want to start the story here. Okay. At the end of the Civil War, all the Confederate regiments, or brigades, a brigade was usually made up of 5 regiments. And by the end of the Civil War, most of the Confederate regiments had been whittled down by disease, desertion, being killed, being wounded, Their normal complement of 1,000 men they started with was often down to 150, or if they were lucky, maybe 320, something like that. Well, a brigade with 5 regiments at the end of the Civil War would be doing good, to have the full strength of a regiment, to have 1,000 men in 5 regiments. And one of these brigades was called the Iron Brigade. It was commanded by General J.O. Shelby. Now, Shelby was a very, very impressive cavalry commander. There's a great book by one of his men, last name of Edwards, Shelby and His Men. If you want a good read, an exciting Civil War read, it reads almost like a fiction novel, all the things they did. But Shelby's claim to fame at the end of the war, his brigade, what was left of it, was 500 men that were still loyal to him in the Confederacy, and they refused to surrender. They fled south with taking several of the Confederate states' governors with them, including the Confederate governor that had been set up in Kentucky and quickly deposed by the Union Army. They fled to the border, and as they were crossing the Rio Grande River, they buried their battle flags in the Rio Grande River. So the last 500 Confederate soldiers, now we're not talking about the ex-Confederate soldiers that made up the outer circle of the Knights of the Golden Circle, the 2,000 or more men that made up that. We're talking about the regular Confederate soldiers under the command of Joe Shelby, who was a Knight of the Golden Circle, who refused to surrender, and they fled into Mexico. Well, they ended up being spread out in Mexico from Veracruz on the Gulf to almost 300 miles straight west of Mexico City. There was a contingent, actually a regiment, what was left of it, of Redbone Indians. And they enjoyed good health in Mexico, but Shelby's troopers became riddled with smallpox, dysentery, and malnutrition. And they were getting kind of homesick, too. A lot of them were Missourians, and they were being sniped at and constantly attacked as well. And now, the whole unit, except for the Redbone Indians, is down sick. Well, again, Shelby is in the Golden Circle, so a message was sent for help. It reached Quantrill, who was the leader of the Golden Circle at the time, and Jesse James, and saying basically, if you don't come rescue us, we're all going to be dead. So they held a secret meeting, an emergency secret meeting, the Golden Circle leadership, in Oak Grove, Louisiana, and they designed a rescue mission. And Colonel Quantrill gave, he's recorded as having given quite a speech. It went something like this: I first want men who do not fear death. Second, I want men who have skills to bring out Shelby's troops. I want seasoned rearguard fighters who will turn the rivers of Mexico into blood if need be. There is no assurance any of us will ever get back across the Rio Grande alive. Some of you may be tortured by Benito Juarez fanatics. All of us may and probably will suffer the tortures of the damned. I want the best 100 men that the South can muster for this mission. Well, this speech, again, was passed on from Jesse down to Jesse Lee. So, I'm not saying it's accurate word for word, but the heart and core of the message, I'm sure, thanks to their photographic memories, is pretty close. So Jesse James was chosen as the joint commander for this mission. And he could speak Spanish, French, and German at this time in his life. And Quantrill already knew of his bravery, having had him in his command during the war. And he helped Quantrill handpick the volunteers. They picked 4 doctors that were noted for their shooting ability, because it looked like they were going to need it. And they finally ended up with 88 men. They didn't get their 100, but they got 88. And I guess with the officers, there was a total of 92. And according to the records, Southern gunsmiths delivered 1,000 Colt Remington Smith & Wesson cap and ball pistols, which had been converted into cartridge-type 45s and 44s. Each man would carry 2 Henry rifles, which I believe were capable of 17 shots each. Colonel James brought in leather makers to devise harnesses so that each member of the rescue team could carry 10 pistols in the U-shaped harness, which hung down from neck and shoulders. I'm a little skeptical on this. I do think there were harnesses, but I don't think they carried 10 pistols. That would be way too much weight. I think they maxed out at 6, because that's what Quantrill's men carried during the war. They carried 6 pistols. They did not fight with rifles, even though they were cavalry. They rode right up, stuck a pistol in your face, and pulled the trigger. That's how they fought. So I suspect it was more like 6 pistols per man. So anyway, they planned their route and everything, and got their supplies, and they took off to rescue Joe Shelby. They broke up into 2 different parties, with Quantrill commanding one, Jesse James the other. And they kept in sight of each other, and they had Confederate signs and passwords like they'd used in the war. Excuse me. And they were going through an area where terrorists were raiding villages and shooting up the countryside. But excuse me, they were no match for the ex-Confederate guerrillas here. And I'm not sure ex is really appropriate. They were still actually Confederate guerrillas when you get right down to it. So they got about halfway between Mexico City and Veracruz, and Shelby met them for a strategy meeting. And then Jesse met with the Emperor Maximilian. At the time, Jesse was 23 years old. And Maximilian gave him a full colonel's commission in the European army. And they hit it off really good. But Jesse saw that Maximilian's position was, the word is untenable. It means without hope. And so he recommended to Maximilian to abdicate. And he says, we'll take you back to Texas with General Shelby's forces. We'll rescue you. We'll get you out of Mexico. And Maximilian had been in Mexico about 4 years at this time. And he had a small but loyal following. And he felt that if he left, that members of his court would be butchered by Benito Juarez patriots. And here's where it gets interesting. And then he broached the matter of his treasure to Jesse James. And of course, when Jesse James heard the word treasure, you can imagine that he was all ears. So the emperor told him that he was entrusted with valuable House of Habsburg jewels, crown jewels and heirlooms. And there was his own great wealth as well. But more important, he said the Aztec Indians that he had some of in his following knew where a large Aztec treasure cache was located. Some of the gold and jewels had been hidden by Montezuma's loyal servants, trying to keep it out of the hands of the greedy Spanish conquistadores. And the rest of it had been stolen by Aztec porters lugging it from Mexico City to Veracruz, where it would be put on ships bound for Spain. Maximilian could not estimate the value because he had never seen it, but he said, "It is vast. It is vast." So Jesse tells him that the treasure can't be allowed to fall into the hands of Juarez's bloody peons, as he put it. And so they cut a deal for Jesse and his men to retrieve the treasure and bring it out so it doesn't fall into the Mexicans' hands. And Jesse took 50 of Shelby's cavalrymen that could still ride the saddle, and they went and they dug up the Montezuma treasure, and they got all of Maximilian's personal treasure, and they moved it to a mountain hideout. Some of you, if you've ever researched treasure, might have heard of Castle Rock. You might want to do a little work on that. It was there for a time, but it has since been moved and is there no longer. So Jesse had to say goodbye to Maximilian because he wouldn't leave. And he found out a few days later, actually just not even a full day later, that Maximilian had been captured and stood up against a wall and shot by quote-unquote Mexican patriots using old muzzle-loading rifles. So, believing that the emperor was dead, Jesse and his bodyguard John Trammell avoided towns where the French garrisons were being slaughtered. They're saying in the records that Shelby had 3,000 men with him, and I don't see how that's possible because he only had 500 when he crossed the border. I think that's the wrong figure. But they had to get wagons together to haul a lot of the troopers that were too sick to walk or ride horses. And as they proceeded towards Texas, many of the Shelby's men began to recover their strength, so they were able to help. But they basically had to fight their way out of Mexico, and they set ambushes, and only, they were like a special forces team. I remember during the Iraqi war, they dropped a 5-man, I think a Delta Force team. Maybe wrong with that, might have been Navy SEALs. It's one or the other. They parachuted in at night, and they dug a little bunker on a little hilltop where they could keep track of an important road junction where two roads crossed, and they could record the military equipment movements and stuff. And they were dug in with only a very little tiny slit, showing where they could watch the junction. And the next day, after they were dug in, a little girl about 7 or 8 years old was out playing on the hillside there and saw that slit and was curious about what it was and got right up to it and looked in on these 5 soldiers, in camouflage paint with their weapons. And they were under orders, if that happened, to kill anybody that got there. Pull the body into the bunker. And they couldn't kill that little girl because that's not the American psyche, is not to kill innocent children. So they let her go, and she ran screaming back down the hill, got her grandfather, and brought him up there, a real old guy, and he gets down and looks right in on the soldiers. And they couldn't kill him either. So he runs back shouting and screaming, and I think there was one phone in town, and pretty soon 150 Republican guards show up to capture or kill these Americans. And they get in a complete shootout. I mean, serious shootout with automatic weapons. And in 2 hours, these 5 American soldiers killed 120 of the 150 men that were attacking them. And a helicopter was able to come in and rescue them. They all got out safely, and none of them had any wounds. Now, the reason why, besides possible divine intervention, is that these 5 soldiers were so well trained and so skilled in the arts of war, far beyond what their opponents were. Well, by the same token, these 88 men that went to rescue Shelby's men, and all of Shelby's men were veterans. If they were well enough to fight, they were good to go. They were really, really good cavalrymen. So what they did, knowing they were so vastly outnumbered, was they used strategies and they used ambushes. And it worked. And even the French tried to stop them. They ended up having to kill a number of the French soldiers. Because the French thought they were stealing Maximilian's treasure. Because everybody believed him to be dead, but as it turns out, Maximilian wasn't dead. The Mexicans carried him to a grave that was dug, and were getting ready to throw him in, and one of the Indian servants of Maximilian saw his arm move and realized he was still alive. And so they quickly asked the Mexicans if they could bury their dead leader, and the Mexicans said, okay, dead is dead. We don't care. It just saves us some work. So they speared him out of the area in a cart, and they brought him to Livingston, Texas, and then into the big thicket where the Alabama Coushatta Indians have a reservation. And the Indians treated him, with their herbal medicine and one thing and another. And he was pretty much in a bad way. And Jesse got Shelby and his men out of Mexico and got a message to come to Livingston as quickly as possible. And they were told to bring Dr. James, or Dr. Franklin James. So Jesse and Frank went, and they were taken to the Indian reservation, and that's where they discovered that Maximilian was still alive. He was so crippled at the time, he had to walk sideways. He couldn't even walk normal. And Frank James, who was a very skilled surgeon, and by the way, when I got to see the James family records, I saw Frank James' medical diploma from the Missouri School of Medicine. I saw it. And he had already saved Jesse's life when he was shot through the lung while riding with Quantrill. And a lung wound back in the Civil War days was almost always fatal. So, Emperor Maximilian was so grateful for all the help, and Frank did extensive surgery on him and got him to where he could walk normal, but he was somewhat crippled, and he was he had pain for the rest of his life because remember, he'd been shot by a firing squad. He'd been hit by several musket balls. Anyway, he took the alias of John Maxey. There's arguments over the spelling. Was it M-A-X-I? What I found was that in East Texas today are the Maxies, the M-A-X-E-Y. I think these are the descendants of Emperor Maximilian. John Maxey went into the lumber business in East Texas and apparently made more fortunes. He had money to set himself up in business thanks to the Golden Circle. And I was told by Jesse Lee that Maximilian paid the Golden Circle $10 million for their services. Now, $10 million at today's prices would probably be more something like $800 million would be what Maximilian had paid in today's value of money. So that's another story. See, this is another example. History will tell you that the Emperor Maximilian was executed by firing squad, period, in the story. But see, there's too many details in this story. The whole thing, I have been to Livingston. I've been to the Alabama Coushatta Reservation. It's in a big area of woods called the Big Thicket. And they even have an old train ride. You can get on an old train and go through there. And man, I would highly recommend anybody that can ever take that train trip, do it. And if you can do it in the fall when the leaves change, it is awesome. But you will go through the deep woods on the train, and quite an area. And, visit the Alabama Coushatta Reservation while you're there. Let's see. Because of this rescue of Maximilian and the removal of the Habsburg jewels and everything, the Rothschilds of Europe put a $50,000 price bounty on the head of Jesse James, and a price of $25,000 on each man, each of the other 87 men, or 91 men who went down to Mexico with him. It's estimated that they slew at least 1,000 men as they fought their way north back into Texas. And see, you don't find this. This is not something you don't see it on the History Channel. But it did happen. And supposedly Maximilian, as a result of this, went through a religious experience, confessed, his crimes of having men shot for not showing mercy, having men shot for desertion, being a dictator, being, really, really tough on penalties against people that gave him any resistance at all. And supposedly he got, he saw the light, and he said, God spared my life in this miraculous manner, and supposedly turned into a good guy. Anyway, I'm not taking the time to verify that, but that is the story. I thought you'd like to hear that. Let's see. Now, I want to tell you another interesting thing about Jesse James. When he died in Granbury, Texas, in a little bitty old shacky house in 1951, friend's house, his estate was estimated to be worth $2 billion with a B dollars in 1951. Again, at today's prices, you're looking at what? hundreds of billions of dollars. Anyway, Jesse Lee James was the executor of Jesse's estate and his will. And before he could even get his grandfather buried in the cemetery there in Granbury, and you can go there and see his grave, it's got 2 Confederate flags on it, and it has Jesse Woodson James. I've been to the grave. That I wanted to verify and see for myself, and it's there. Oh, excuse me, I lost my train of thought there. Hang on a minute, I'm going to grab a drink of water. Yeah. Okay, so Jesse, is trying to make funeral arrangements, get him buried, and the James family relatives, a whole horde of them descended on Granbury. And I think Jesse Lee stood on the courthouse steps trying to get them to calm down and get some order. And they're demanding their share of Jesse's estate. And they got Jesse so mad that he just refused to probate the will, and it was never probated. So Jesse's estate never went, they didn't receive a penny of any of it because of their selfish, rude way that they didn't even show the old man enough respect to wait till after the funeral to go fighting and squabbling over the wealth. So Jesse told me, he said that, a lot of the investments and things have been lost. He said most of the estate is gone. But he said, I'd rather see that happen than have those greedy people. And I'll leave the expletives out that he called them. But I know how he felt on that. I saw that kind of thing in my family when my grandfather died. 10 aunts and uncles, and they all went to fight and squabbling over a very small state. It's just amazing the greed that can set in a situation like that. Okay, Mike, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask about Jesse James?
I don't know. Guys, if you have any questions up to this point, jump in and ask away. I've kind of been going back and forth.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen anything up till now unless I missed something. But no, I think up till now we're pretty good. But if you want to take a break, get a glass of water or anything, and we can give it a minute and see if anybody's... I know they're listening in.
Yeah, no, let me go ahead and tell them another story here. We're going to go back to the Civil War. And when Jesse was riding with Quantrill. And remember, I talked earlier about a man named Harrison Trow. He was one of Quantrill's most trusted captains. And, he was the one they were going to get to identify Jesse's body, except Jesse replaced him and, of course, identified Bigelow's body as him. Well, Harrison Trow wrote a book. It's very rare. Original first edition copy would be worth a lot of money. I have a photocopy of the book. He wrote about Quantrill and riding with Quantrill, and he tells a story about how and I have looked up the so-called official account of this story, and it is so different from Trow's.
Dorian, before we get too far, we do have a question, or do you want to wait till after this?
That's fine. I haven't really got into this yet, so it's okay. Go ahead.
Do you know if Jesse made it into Ohio?
Yes, he did.
Bill's saying he heard stories of him being just south of him.
Yes, he did. Jesse traveled a lot all over, the United States. Of course, Kentucky being his home, he would go back to see his parents while they were alive. He traveled, spent a lot of time in Texas, and that corridor up through Missouri and all out there. And he went out west a lot. New Mexico, there were a lot of KGC caches he supervised the hiding of out in the western states, but he got up into Ohio. I have records of him in Illinois. Let's see. West Virginia, got records of people where he stayed at their house when he passed through the area, he and Frank. And I'm trying to think. Of course, with the KGC hiding one of their caches right in one corner of the Capitol lawn in Ohio, that definitely shows they were active up there. And Bill, I was trying to think south. Let's see. Now, where, Bill? Where are you located? Where's he located?
He's in oh geez, I'm trying. I know the. Oh, it escapes me.
What's the general? What part of the state is he in?
He's in southeast. Oh, I know the name of the town. It's on. He's probably an hour east of Columbus, a little southeast.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Well, there's a town.
He said, does anything specifically mention White Cottage, Ohio? Zanesville. Yeah, he's in Zanesville.
Okay. Zanesville, there is Golden Circle activity connected with Zanesville. I ran across it, but I wasn't working any projects in that area. So, it didn't stick in my mind. But I will tell you that I know there was Golden Circle activity in Zanesville. And Zanesville has another claim to fame, and this is one of the most closely guarded secrets. I don't guess anybody's going to kill me if I break it. It won't do any good if I break the secret, will it?
Right.
Okay. Among religious circles, there's a lot of discussion and predictions and things about will there be a third temple built on the Temple Mount in Israel. Well, the stone for that third temple was cut in Indiana. It was cut at the Bedford Stone Quarries and shipped to Israel in 1966 and 67. The stone at the Bedford Quarry is oolitic limestone, which is the finest limestone in the world. Many courthouses in the United States are built out of it. So it was selected because Israel could not cut the stone in their country without spies finding out they were cutting stone for a third temple. So they picked the United States, plus the fact they knew they could get the very best quality material possible. And the stone for the base and lower levels of the third temple was cut at Bedford. I know a man personally who took his grown son. When he got this information, he went up there to ask the management of the company if they were cutting stone for a third temple. He was met at the front gate by armed guards carrying automatic weapons, which you almost never saw back in 1966. And when he asked them if stone was being cut for a third temple, he was met with a string of profanity by the leader of the guards, and he was told to turn around and leave immediately and never come back. Now, this is a stone quarry, not a bank or a secret military installation, right? So what did they have to hide?
Right.
Okay. Well, there is another type of limestone that is used when you're building a very tall building. It is still very high quality, but it weighs a good deal less than oolitic limestone. It's called tufa, Tufa. The limestone quarries in Zanesville, that's what they mined was tufa limestone, and I'm told they furnished these limestone for the upper part of the third temple. And my information is that it is stored on pallets. Each stone is numbered. They know exactly where each stone goes in the building. They're stored on pallets at an underground level of a U.S., or not a U.S., but an Israeli Air Force base over in Israel. So when the time comes that they can build a temple without starting a war, the temple will probably go up so fast it will surprise the world because it's basically like Legos. It's ready to go.
Wow. Hey, so let me. Jonathan Hopper said there was 3 bricks recovered in the Bigelow grave. Dorian said 1 brick named Bigelow Brothers. What was on the other 2? It was all there was a name for each brother on the brick, right?
No,
Okay, then
I'm
I
sorry.
misunderstood.
All 3 brothers were on the same brick.
Okay.
Uh, I remember from seeing that the top name was John Bigelow in medium letters. In the middle was Charlie Bigelow in big letters. And then he was running out of room, so he wrote Bert Bigelow underneath that name in smaller letters.
Okay, so whose names were on the other 2 bricks?
It wasn't names; it was the story of the assassination or of the execution of the Bigelows.
So, but those bricks, I'm so confused then. Those bricks were recovered as well?
Well, 3 of the 6 bricks were recovered. We don't know if the other 3 are still in the grave or not. They may not have dug deep enough. What I think they probably did, see, they wanted to exhume Jesse James' body and prove it was him, but they didn't have DNA testing back then.
Right.
This was like 1981. This was done, as I recall. So they got their so-called experts and they dug up the body of Charlie Bigelow, but it was not right on top of the other 2 brothers. There was several feet of dirt between Bigelow's body and the other 2. So I think the other 3 bricks are still down there with the other 2 skeletons, which they never excavated.
Okay, but hold on, because I'm still confused, and I'm guessing everybody else is too.
Okay.
3 bricks were recovered. On 1 brick was the name of the 3 brothers. What was on the other 2 bricks recovered?
Well, I'll tell you again. It's the story of the execution of Charlie Bigelow. That Jesse James was the one who killed him.
So that's what was written on the 2 bricks recovered.
3 bricks were recovered, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, I understand that. 1 brick had the brothers' names. The other 2 was
Right.
the story of how Jesse James executed him. Then.
Yeah, I've only seen that newspaper photo, and they're only holding up the brick that has the 3 names on it. You know, they don't show the other 2 bricks, so I don't know exactly what's on the other 2.
Okay, it's at least, but it should be part of the story.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
Yes.
That's what I was getting at. Because was it the whole story? Was it part of the story? That's where I think we had some confusion. Randy Cullen asked, where were his mines in Kentucky?
Where were his mines in Kentucky?
Were his mines, Jesse James mines? You said he did mining. Did he have any in Kentucky?
I don't know of any KGC mining operations in Kentucky, although there could have been, because there is, contrary to the geologist reports, there is a lot of silver in Kentucky. I know that personally because I spent 25 years chasing down the John Swift silver mines, the famous John Swift silver mines, and I found 4 of his 6 mines.
Okay, do you know? Let's go with this. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hurry you along because they're asking me more questions and I'm getting behind here.
Oh, okay.
Where are we at?
Hang on just a minute, Mike.
Yeah.
Let me go back and talk about the mines. The mines that I know about, they had 92 very rich, productive gold mines out near El Paso in the Davis Mountains, Big Bend area of Texas.
Okay, good deal. That answers that. Okay, I think I said this, but I don't know if we got there to it. Bill was wanting to know, is there anything specifically that you know of in reference to Jesse James with White Cottage, Ohio?
I do not. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I don't know if you'd answered that or not. I'm sorry if you did.
Yeah. The
Um,
I might mention names in states that you want to pay attention to: Center Point, Centerville, Canton. Uh,
hmm.
those names, I would suggest, especially if they're small towns, go to the cemetery and look for a tombstone that something is wrong on it. It has a circle of letters that don't make any sense. It has the guy dying before he was even born. Something wrong, something unusual, out of the ordinary. And if you find that, then you've probably got a KGC treasure marker. This is the beginning of a treasure hunt.
Mm.
You have to decode what's on that stone to know which direction to pursue to find the next marker.
Okay. My Fuson said, when I was a kid, I remember a guy saying Frank spent some time in Indiana not far from me. I'm not sure where Mike is. I want to say he's about an hour west of the Ohio border. Mike, shoot in there, type in there real quick. What part? Have you heard of any parts of Indiana?
Gotten into the Indiana State Archives records, and there is a lot of talk about the Golden Circle activity in Indiana.
Okay.
It was a hotbed of Golden Circle activity. The thing is, to get, I could have asked Jesse, about, and he could have told me about treasure sites in Indiana, but I was in Texas. I wasn't planning to go up to Indiana. I was busy working the Western KGC stuff. Texas had plenty of caches that I was interested in, so that's why I don't know a lot about Indiana. But I have, in my research, discovered that they had a real problem with the Golden Circle, and it's recorded in the state archives.
Okay.
So if the Golden Circle was there, you can bet there are caches there too. Wherever you find Golden Circle activity, you're going to find stuff hidden.
Okay. Next question. Shot past it. Sorry, it's hard for me to keep up in the chat sometimes when. Randy wants to know, was Billy the Kid also in the KGC?
Absolutely.
How did that come about? Do you know, or can you talk about that at all?
Well, Pat Garrett was in one of the 5 organizations. I mentioned before there were 5 secret Confederate organizations. The Knights of the Golden Circle being basically overall. Then you had the Knights of the White Camellia. You had the American Anti-Horse Thief Society. You had the Sons of Liberty, and then you had the original Ku Klux Klan.
Okay.
Pat Garrett was involved in one of those organizations, and I've never been able to totally convince myself which one it was. I do know he did not kill Billy the Kid. That was another, deliberate faking of death there. So Billy could have a chance at living a productive life, which he did. He became the owner of a big cattle ranch, never was in any trouble, living under the name of Brushy Bill Roberts, and he was, I think, 94 when he died.
Interesting. Very cool. Now, one thing, why don't we hear about Frank James nearly as much? And then what did Frank James do after his brother's death? And then was there ever, why isn't he in the picture as much?
Well, actually, his brother didn't die.
Right, after he I'm sorry if I said it after he died. After he supposedly died.
Right.
Where does his story go? And
Frank was a member of the inner circle. And, responsibilities, every one of them had specific responsibilities and things they had to take care of. Um, I'm not sure. It's always been a bit of a mystery in terms of Frank. Frank was he was there. I mean, it's like President Trump has his own has a I say own personal physician. He has a what's the guy who's the head physician?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, uh, Frank was the official doctor surgeon to the Golden Circle, and so he traveled. He performed surgeries on, the Golden Circle people were like everybody else. They got sick, they got cancer, they got various things as time went on. And we do know that Frank was involved in the hiding of a number of caches in Oklahoma, especially in the Wichita Mountains. There is a lot of Golden Circle stuff, I think, still cached in the Wichitas. It's an awesome place if you've never been there. The mountains are made out of giant granite boulders, some of them much bigger than a two-story house. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. You feel like you're on a Western movie set when you're there. I hunted Spanish treasure in the Wichitas. I did not hunt Golden Circle, but I ran across many references to Golden Circle caches. There's a big book. Excuse me. I have a copy in my library. I've had it for 40 years. I think it's called Oklahoma Treasures. A lot of stuff, maps, a lot of treasure stories in that book, and quite a few, and stories about Frank James being in Oklahoma and hiding treasure. A lot of the stuff that's in that book is actually Golden Circle. So if you want a great book to add to your library and some great reading, if you're interested in treasure, I highly recommend this book. Like I said, I think it may be called, excuse me, Oklahoma Treasures and something else. Pardon me. But I will check the title.
Okay.
And I'll post it on All Metal Mode tomorrow, along with the author. And I'll even see if it's available for purchase anywhere. You might have to try to find a used copy. Do one of the book search engines. That's where they search 30,000 bookstores worldwide. Mm-hmm. And you might be able to find a copy. It's a great big old book. It had a brown paper cover, treasure signs carved on it, treasure maps printed on the cover. But it's a fascinating book. It's to me, it's a valuable part of my library.
Hey, real quick, another question. Jonathan says he's always been curious. Supposedly Jesse James robbed the Tishomingo, I hope I said that right, Savings Bank in Corinth, Mississippi, around 1874. Did he ever frequent North Mississippi?
He was all over the South, every southern state, every state that had been in the Confederacy. I find tracks, as it were.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind that some of those robberies were not pulled by Jesse Woodson James. They were pulled by Jesse Robert James. Again, these guys are all part of the Golden Circle resistance. And remember, please, I know this is complicated, but that's just what it is. After the Civil War, remember the Northern bankers wanted to take over the Southern banking industry, and they succeeded. So after the Civil War, a lot of those Southern banks were targets for the Golden Circle because they were owned, or insured by the Northern bankers, by Jay Gould. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
See, that's the thing, until you understand this resistance war that was going on, all you've got is a bunch of outlaws robbing banks and trains. But when you understand that these were not random targets, they were carefully selected, and they would take the money that they got and they would go into Wall Street and invest it in the stock market, in the railroads, in new industry springing up, the oil industry, and they would take that fortune and they would make a bigger fortune. And this is what would end up being converted into gold bullion. You know, I mean, the Golden Circle was not just mining gold or just holding up Wells Fargo stagecoaches or robbing trains, you know, for gold coins. They were also making fortunes by taking their stolen money and investing it.
Hmm.
So that's why they ended up with so much wealth to hide. And they also had gold mines out farther west, Arizona, New Mexico. I pick up, you know, bits and pieces of that activity. Nothing where I could say put an X on a map and say you need to go here and look for their gold mines. A lot of times you learn where to look by doing things like going to the state archives, and you know you find where some legislator says, you know, I talked to one of my constituents who lives up near, just pick a name, Buzzard's Roost Gulch, you know, in the Emmetsburg Mountains, and you know, he came across a party of men who were gathered in Deep Gulch Canyon, you know, and they seemed to be digging a big hole, you know, back under the edge of a cliff or something like that. And when he approached, you know, the men threatened him and so and so. I mean, you find leads like that. And when you see in those leads it mentions names like Big Gulch Canyon or whatever, well, that's a logical place to go look for KGC treasure markers, see?
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting.
And you know, let's keep this in mind too. Out west, with all of the territory, you know, if you've never been out west, those of you listening, man, you need to go. I was out in New Mexico, you know, last year, and I was out in Nevada and New Mexico last year, and it was just an awesome experience. But the point is, there are so many places that are remote to this very day. Perfect place to hide major caches and things because they could not be easily stumbled upon or found. You know, you had to have markers. You had to have a place to start the hunt, and you had to know how to proceed to the next marker, and then find out what that marker told you to do, and follow that instruction. And they knew that would eliminate 99.9% of all the potential treasure stealers. You know, plus they had their codes. Of course, there were Golden Circle members. You know, they were Masons, and they ended up having a crooked streak. They got greedy and they went back. You know, and they tried to excavate some of the things they helped hide. Near Salado, Texas, is a mesa. And I have a Confederate engineer's blueprint in my files. It shows the mesa is hollowed out on 3 levels. It has 3 tunnels connected by a vertical shaft. And on the top level, nearest to the top of the mesa, inside the mesa, is living quarters. The second level, which proceeds in 2 directions from the center shaft, just like the top level does, says arms and ammunition. It's an arsenal. And the third level is said to have over 289,000 40 and 60-pound gold bars in it. And that's what it shows, the gold stacked the symbols in the drawing. Well, it was carefully hidden and sealed up when they decided in 1916 to seal up all the caches. And they would have a circuit rider who would be charged with continually riding from one cache to another, to another, to another. He would be given so many caches that he would cover in a 30-day circuit, and then he would start all over again. Because they were hidden to the extent that no one trying to open one of the big caches could open it within 30 days. It would take probably 60 to 90 days of digging because they would so carefully fill the tunnel. These would have a tunnel big enough for a horse and wagon, to carry the bullion into the central depository inside. So when they sealed it up, they back sealed it. They started at the edge of the depository room and they filled it all the way out to the outside with rock and dirt, and they would set booby traps. Sometimes water, sometimes black powder. I saw one was really interesting. It was a wall. It was a tunnel inside a cave. There was 3 tunnels, and 2 of them were stacked with dry rock, all the way to the top. The 2 tunnels were sealed with carefully stacked rock. The 3rd tunnel looked like a mud wall, and it had pieces of rawhide leather sticking out of it in rows. Well, that one was new to me, so I contacted Jesse Lee, and he explained to me that it was set so that they poured water on the rawhide, which caused it to draw up, and that actually cocked the booby traps, and the tension of the straps that are held in place in the mud wall by the dried mud, kept the booby trap from going off. But if you or I tried to break through that mud wall, Mike, we would release the tension and the booby trap would explode. So, that's the kind
scary.
of thing. Pardon?
I said that's scary.
Yeah. Well, a number of people have died setting off these booby traps. I had, thankfully in this case, the guy who found these had read an article I'd done called "The Red Hand Means Danger" about how they booby trap these, and he showed me the pictures. And, so I double checked with Jesse Lee, and Jesse says if he breaks that wall, he's a dead man.
Mm.
Where the rawhide strips were hanging out of the mud. So he didn't, and he lived. And by the way, that reminds me of something. It's not quite KGC gold, but it is all about a big treasure. I had a guy come into the factory at Garrett, and he was had a slightly German accent, and he's telling me about a big treasure recovery project of Nazi gold that he's going to do. And it was on a remote lake in Austria surrounded by high mountains. And I happen to know a little bit about Nazi gold and the Nazi organizations, and I know that they had their secret organizations. One of them was called Der Spinne, which means the spider, and it operated in the United States, and it helped Nazi war criminals get fake American identities and get set up in business here in the States. I actually met one of these war criminals in a little town in Texas. But anyway, I knew something about this particular treasure, and I told him, I said, the treasure is carefully watched. You will not be allowed to recover it. You are placing your life and the life of your crew on your boat in extreme jeopardy if you go over there. Well, he didn't agree with me. He had all these reasons and justifications how, they were going to be alert and that wasn't going to happen to them. And so he went. And a few weeks later, I got word that they just got the boat over the site where they believed the gold was in the bottom. We're getting ready to start diving, and a rifle shot rang out from the top of the surrounding mountains, and he fell to the deck with a bullet through his heart. And that was the end of that.
Mm.
So when I tell people, take warning that there are people still guarding these caches, and it's not going to be a cakewalk. If you want to get one out, you could be risking your life very, very easily. Some will believe me, some won't. But if I tell them and they go out there and foolishly get killed, it's kind of like the lost Dutchman's mine. Some idiot out there was shooting people for years. I think he killed over 20 people that were searching for the lost Dutchman's mine. They'd just be out there searching, and the rifle shot, boom, and they're dead. And they're just some treasures that, treasure's not worth losing your life over. It's supposed to be an exciting, enjoyable, and rewarding experience. Now granted, I'm not saying that if the KGC buried $10,000 in gold coins that they've got it guarded. But I'm saying if they buried 10,000 bars of gold, you better believe it's guarded.
Right. It's crazy.
So anyway, I wanted to go back to Salado just a minute, Mike. I have on the Confederate Engineers blueprint, Jesse James himself drew 7 little stick figures at various places on the mesa and the entrance to the tunnel. And they're laying there like they're dead. And it turned out, Jesse told me, he said, one of the circuit riders saw digging activity in the entrance to the tunnel, the main tunnel going back into the mesa where the depository was. And so what he did then, he gets to the nearest telephone or telegraph, and he sends a message to headquarters in Nashville underneath the Ryman Auditorium, the Grand Ole Opry building. He would send a message with a code word that would tell them that someone was trying to excavate a major cache. Well, in this case, Jesse got a number of men, and they went there, and they had a shootout. And those 7 little stick figures on the engineer's drawing, you're looking at it from the side, like an X-ray vision of the whole mesa. And he's got like a couple little stick figures laying on top of the mesa, and 2 or 3 around the entrance, and then another one scattered here and another one there. He said, my grandfather marked the location of where all 7 of the men that were digging in the cache were killed. So that's quite interesting to me. That's a treasured part of my collection, that drawing with this 7 little stick figures there.
Yeah, that's neat. That is so neat. Let me see. Salado, you mean the town, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
The mesa is along Salado Creek. What they would do on those big treasures, they had to be able to get back into them, and not get blown up by their own booby traps.
Bill, hold on real quick. I've seen videos on this, and I think it's funny, but I'm sorry. Bill said, tell Dorian those mesas are ancient giant tree stumps. And see if you can get a chuckle out of him.
Yeah, there you go.
Boy, they sure do look like trees to me, though. I'm just saying. They look like tree stumps.
Well, that one, the Devil's Tower, out there where they filmed Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that old movie. Mm-hmm. It's called the Devil's Tower. You can Google it and bring up pictures. That is a giant tree stump from the pre-flood world. There are giant tree stumps, but this is a mesa. It's just a flat top hill is what it is.
Yeah.
It's got strata laid down like, limestone strata and stuff. So this is not a tree stump, but yes, there are giant tree stumps. There's no question about it.
I think some of them look like petrified tree stumps. I'm not saying they are. I don't know
Yeah.
enough about it, but it sure is
Well, there's
curious.
a lot of strange things, Mike. When Cincinnati was settled about 1790, they built Fort Washington was the first structure there.
Mm-hmm.
And when the settlers started coming in and building their cabins, along the banks of the Ohio, there right at Cincinnati, they were digging wells, and they dug down 60 feet, and they found tree stumps, big, giant tree stumps, not as big as the ones we just talked about, but still like redwoods, the huge tree stumps. And on one of them, they found an iron axe head, 60 feet down, you know, in an area that showed no other signs of human habitation on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain that?
Mm.
Yeah. And how about when the first settlers got to Lexington, Kentucky, which is the horse capital of the world now, they found ruins of a stone city, and they found an entrance to a cave, and inside the cave they found 200 or 2,000 niches carved into the rock walls, and each one of those niches was an Egyptian-style mummy, complete with the embalming spices and everything.
Hmm.
And they thought they belonged to the Native American Indians, and they took all 2,000 of these mummies out and they burned them.
Hmm.
When an archaeologist heard about it, he rushed to the site, and he saw the empty niches, the carved niches in the cave, and he picked up 17 baskets of mummy wrappings, of fragments. 17 bushel baskets, he said. And he said that, he talked about the strong smell of spices on the wrappings.
Hmm.
Now there's no trace of that city. There's nothing in the historical records. You go to Lexington libraries, there's nothing. It's been covered up completely. Because it would force the United States historians to rewrite history. And there's a lot of discoveries like the Mummy Cave in Lexington that have been deliberately covered up so they won't have to rewrite history.
Dorian, are we at a good stopping point?
I guess so.
Okay, well, let's do part two. We're not nearly as far in it as you wanted to go, correct?
Yeah, I want to talk a lot more about specific treasures. I'd like to do a show, and I'd like to go from one treasure, Jesse James treasure, to another, to another, to another, and give you the details that I have on them. Because I'm never going to get to these. Maybe somebody else will actually find one of them.
Let's do that next week. How about that? We'll go ahead and plan it and give you some time, and let's stay with it so we don't forget and forget where you're at and stuff. How about that?
Okay.
Let's do that.
Works for me.
Good deal. So I am ready to get up and move around and be done. I'm tired. So let's go ahead and call it a night. But great story, Dorian. I enjoyed listening to it. We had touched on some of it. You had touched on some of it before, but not nearly as in depth. And
well, what I'm hoping is a takeaway here for everybody is that the thing of research, of digging deeper, it makes such a difference in how you perceive the world and history. You can pick anything. If you get out of the box, and you're saying, well, okay, this is the official version of this battle or, this outlaw gang's activities, but are there any records I could find that might give me more information, or maybe that these guys were involved in things besides just being regular bank robbers or train robbers.
Mm.
And, if you do that with Jesse James, you start coming up with this stuff, see?
Yeah.
Excuse me. But anyway, the the whole thing is, again, you can see if you take two sets of Jesse and Frank James and put them together into one, if you try to discover the truth about what they did, you're hamstrung. You can't do it until you understand you're dealing with two sets of brothers.
Yeah.
And there were actually, like I said, there were four at that time living. There was Jesse Robert James, Jesse Woodson James, and there was two other James boys. So it's possible that elements of the other two got mixed into these stories too, see? And Jesse James was seen in so many places. Well, that would be a lot easier to do if you have 3 or 4 Jesse James running around.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, did they work together at all?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They did. These boys, they were first brought into the Freemasons, and then, the ones that showed promise and showed they could keep their mouths shut and keep secrets, then they were brought into the Golden Circle. I'll tell you this. Revealing KGC secrets was not beneficial to your longevity because, the almost any other KGC member, if they knew you had betrayed your oath, they would personally walk right up to you and kill you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So we don't know how many died, but we do know that old Jesse told his grandson that he'd probably killed at least 2,000 men. And Mike, you know what, of course, where East Texas is. And around with Keith's area, you were up there, right? Well, that around Kilgore, Texas, which is not far from Gilmer, where Keith Wills lives, that was like the center of a big, huge oil field boom during World War II. And let's see, 3/4 of all of the oil used by the Allied forces during World War II, which was a humongous amount of oil, came out of that oil field.
Wow.
Well, Jesse was living in the little town of Gladewater, Texas, along with Jesse Lee, and he invested, and so did Maximilian, John Maxey. They both invested in the booming oil fields. They got in on the ground floor, and Jesse made who knows how many millions in the oil business before he died. That was part of his estate.
Wow.
So these guys, the point is that they were a lot more than just common bank robbers or train robbers like you see in the movies. These guys were smart. They were thinkers. They were involved in amazing projects. They were investing, they were mining. They were whatever made money that might help them obtain their goal, of eventually overthrowing the North.
Interesting. I'm intrigued. Right. It's so I can't wait to do the next show and talk about some of the treasures. And we do these, and I'm just, not only am I like just ready to get up and walk around and stretch, like you drain my brain trying to wrap my mind around all this and take it all in is almost overwhelming. So I think it's a good time to, I'm sure I'm not alone, you know what I mean? And I'd rather spread it out a little bit and let people wrap their minds around what you're talking about. And it's a lot to take in, but so cool. So cool.
Yep. Okay. But, well, like I said, we'll get into some of in fact, I'll pull out my Oklahoma book and I'll pick out some of the KGC treasures in there.
Awesome.
We'll talk about those. I don't know, Mike, do we have any anybody listening from out west in the western states?
I don't know if we got anybody in chat from the western states. I mean, Dennis is in. He's not far from me. Randy is from Texas. Well, he was living in Texas. He's in one of the Carolinas now. I forget which one. No, I don't know. Not in chat. We got in the South, but I don't think in the West.
Huh. Yeah, it's if Randy's in the Carolinas, Randy, a little tip for you. Just about every major stream in the state of North Carolina has gold in it.
I'm not sure if he's in North Carolina or South Carolina. I forget where he's at. Randy, where are you at? What? I want to say North Carolina, I think. Don said he's got some family in Wyoming. Bill said he grew up out west. I know he's been in Ohio a lot of years now, though. Randy was just talking. Let me see if he's in South Carolina. I thought he was in North Carolina. He's in South Carolina.
That's all right. He's close enough to get to North Carolina. But he might want to investigate gold prospecting in North Carolina. I wish I was a little closer to North Carolina. I'd do a little bit of that myself there.
Yeah, I don't know how far he is from it, but yeah, for sure. He's been there, I guess, about a year. He moved from Texas. He wasn't too far from me. I'm disappointed we never got together while he was here. I wish I'd have got together with him. Real nice guy, but okay, guys, let's wrap it up.
All right, guys.
I am just.
Well, we bid everybody a good night, and
absolutely.
Pleasant golden dreams.
Absolutely, everybody. We'll be on part 2 next Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Come join us, and thank you for tuning in. And have a great week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.